Usually when we think about a courtroom, we expect like absolute unvarnished reality.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, it's a totally binary environment. I mean, you're guilty or not guilty. You're liable or you're not. The judge sits up there on the bench, the gavel comes down, and the facts are just, well, they're the facts.
Yeah, it is a space fundamentally engineered to strip away illusion. I mean, the entire architecture of a courtroom, from the witness stand to the judge's bench, it's all designed to aggressively peel back the layers and get down to the objective historical truth of what actually happened.
Right. But then think about stepping into a theater. You walk into an acting studio, and suddenly the entire goal, the absolute metric of success, is to manufacture an illusion so perfectly, so seamlessly, that it feels exactly like the truth.
It's a complete 180.
It really is. On the surface, the courtroom and the stage seem like complete irreconcilable opposites. One seeks to uncover the truth, and the other explicitly seeks to invent it.
And yet they both rely entirely on the exact same foundation, which is, a microscopic understanding of human behavior.
Which brings us to the core of what we are doing today. Because what happens when the person presiding over that courtroom, the judge, demanding the cold, hard facts, is also a master student of the theater?
It's a fascinating overlap.
Right. Like, what happens when a brilliant legal mind decides to dissect the exact mechanics of human emotion, vulnerability, and performance? So today, we are uncovering the profound connections between the courtroom, the acting studio, and your daily life.
Yeah, we are.
We're doing a deep dive into an incredible piece of literature and really the remarkable life of its author. The text we have today is Ominous Poetry, LXI Stage Fright. It's volume 60, written by Manuel de Valle y Colón, and it was published in March 2026.
And we need to be clear right off the bat here. This deep dive isn't just about actors pretending to be other people in a play.
Definitely not.
It is about how all of us construct our identities. It's about how we manage our own vulnerabilities and how we navigate the very real, very visceral stage fright of our daily professional and personal lives.
Okay, let's unpack this because we really have to start with the man behind the words. I found myself asking, why did a high-powered, Ivy League educated judge and civil rights lawyer write what is essentially a masterclass in acting technique disguised as poetry?
It's a great question.
Right. Before we can understand the poetry's deep insights into human behavior, we really have to understand the extraordinary observer who lived this life. So who was Manuel de Valle Colón?
Well, to understand the poetry, you have to understand the crucible he was forged in, because his life was an absolute masterclass in navigating completely different, often opposing worlds.
Yeah.
He was born in October 1948 in New York City. And the text details his early years growing up in the housing projects of East Harlem, specifically the Carver houses and then the Douglas projects on the Upper West Side.
And what's fascinating to me is how the environment shapes the observer. I mean, if you were growing up in East Harlem in the 1950s and 60s, you were constantly observing a massive, incredibly diverse spectrum of human behavior.
Everywhere you look.
Right. You are watching people survive, negotiate, adapt. And from those housing projects, you see this unbelievable intellectual spark catch fire in him very early on.
Exactly. He attends Brooklyn Technical High School in the 1960s. And the biographical section of the text includes these striking excerpts from his high school yearbook.
I loved those.
They're so telling, right?
Yeah.
His peers didn't just see a smart kid. They saw a specific kind of gravity in him. They signed his yearbook with prophetic notes like future historian, philosopher, and to a gentleman and a scholar.
It's almost like they already recognized the role he was going to play in the world. But how does a kid from the Douglas projects take that gravity and translate it into the highest echelons of academia? Like, what was the mechanism that actually got him there?
The mechanism was a combination of relentless community engagement and a staggering academic trajectory.
Okay.
While in high school, he wasn't just studying. He was a member of the Aspira Club, the debating society, the polling squad. He was actively being trained by absolute legends of community organizing, people like Antonia Pantoja. And this early exposure to advocacy sets off a chain reaction. He gets selected for the Yale Transitional Year program. From there, he goes to Wesleyan University. Then he broadens his scope entirely, spending time studying in Madrid and at the University of Puerto Rico.
And that time in Puerto Rico seems really crucial. I mean, his parents were from Hatillo and Moca, Puerto Rico. It sounds like he was actively grounding himself in his roots, studying Puerto Rican history, literature, political science, all before stepping onto the next major stage of his life.
Precisely. And that next stage is Princeton University.
Right.
He transfers to Princeton, and he doesn't just attend the university to get a degree and leave. He alters the institution.
He really does.
He founds the Latino Undergraduate College Organization. And even more impressively, he successfully lobbies the university to institute one of the first seminars in the entire Ivy League on the history and politics of Puerto Rico.
That is wild to me. I mean, think about the level of persuasion, the level of absolute command of the room that it takes for an undergraduate student to convince Princeton University to change its curriculum in the late 1960s or early 1970s.
It's unheard of.
Yeah. You don't do that just by being smart. You do that by knowing exactly how to read your audience, how to present an argument, and how to embody the authority of a subject.
And he proved that authority tangibly. His senior thesis at Princeton wasn't just an academic exercise. It actually ended up being incorporated into a memorandum for Senator Jacob Javits.
Right.
And later, that same research was used by the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund to frame their complaint in a landmark civil rights case for bilingual education, Aspira v. Board of Education.
Wait, his undergraduate thesis helped frame a landmark civil rights case?
Yes. That is influence at a profound systemic level before he even finishes his undergraduate degree.
Incredible. And from Princeton, he goes to Yale Law School, graduating in 1974. And just to paint a picture of the environment, to give you an idea of the intellectual horsepower and the intense competition in those rooms, he is graduating alongside classmates who would become major figures in American law, people like Clarence Thomas and Lonnie Guinier.
It's an intense cohort.
Absolutely. And then he just dives headfirst into a career of fierce, varied advocacy.
He really does. He becomes a trial attorney working on bilingual education cases, then prosecutes labor violations. He becomes a partner in a law firm, works as an arbitrator, and eventually achieves a historic milestone.
Right.
He becomes the first Puerto Rican chief administrative law judge of the New York State Division of Human Rights.
And as a judge, he has to make choices about what matters. The text notes he explicitly prioritized the adjudication of racial and sexual harassment cases, along with AIDS-related discrimination cases, making them his absolute highest priority. He later served as a chief administrative law judge for the Social Security Administration down in San Juan.
What's equally important is what he was doing outside the courtroom. Throughout all of this, he was teaching. He taught at Princeton, Yale, Fordham Law. And the text includes a deeply moving anecdote that illustrates how he taught.
Oh, from his student, right.
Yes, from Dr. Daniel Ibarrondo, one of his former students. Dr. Ibarrondo talks about growing up in Harlem with parents who had a second-grade education. And he describes how Manuel del Valle became the crucial bridge between the questions he had about the world and his eventual life's work.
I remember that part. Dr. Ibarrondo specifically says Manuel didn't just give him the answers. He taught him how to conceptualize and articulate his own knowledge about law and history. Like, he gave him the vocabulary to fight his own battles.
Exactly. We also see this impact highlighted in an inscription from Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Oh, yeah.
The text notes he attended her investiture at the Supreme Court, and she signed his copy of her book, calling him her first role model, someone with a passion for fighting for change.
So if we look at this entire life, from the housing projects to the Ivy League, from the activist's bullhorn to the judge's gavel, it's like we are watching a master actor seamlessly shifting between the most demanding roles imaginable.
It really is.
But he's not being fake. I think that's the key difference. He isn't pretending to be these things. He is adapting to the incredibly varied given circumstances of each stage he steps onto without ever losing his core identity. So how did he learn to do that so flawlessly?
The text suggests it comes down to an insatiable, almost anthropological curiosity about the human condition.
Okay.
He didn't just study law. The biographical notes mention his curiosity spanned Thai, Chinese, Japanese, and Taino traditions. He was a student of how different people express their humanity. There is a core quote in the text that perfectly synthesizes his worldview, and it really anchors this entire deep dive.
What's the quote?
It says, "In every courtroom, poem, or painting, he asks not just, 'What is this?' but what does it mean to be human here?"
What does it mean to be human here? That is such a powerful, focusing lens. And honestly, it's the perfect bridge into the poetry itself, specifically into Volume 60's Stage Fright. Because if his whole life required adapting to different stages, how exactly did he codify that? Does the text explain how he broke down human behavior into a learnable craft?
It does, and it begins by tackling the very concept of stage fright. The poetry establishes a foundational premise: no one inherits stage fright.
Interesting.
Right. It is not written into our DNA. It is entirely a learned behavior.
Which makes total sense when you think about it. I mean, the text portrays the stage, whether it's an actual Broadway theater or a makeshift school auditorium, as a welcoming playground for children.
Yeah.
When you're a kid, the stage is just a place of learning and illusion where mistakes are perfectly fine. You memorize some lines, you put on a costume, you say the words, and you play the game.
Right. If you think about the evolutionary psychology of play, children use play to test boundaries safely. On a real playground, if you play dodgeball, you actually get hit. You experience physical consequence.
Yeah, that hurts.
Exactly. But the stage is a sanctuary of pretend. Yet the text points out that as we get older, society teaches us to be terrified of being seen. We learn to fear the judgment of the audience.
Right.
And that audience doesn't have to be sitting in velvet theater seats. That audience could be sitting across a conference table from you or judging you in a courtroom.
So fear is learned.
AJ.
And to combat that learned fear, the text dives into the specific tactical teachings of legendary action coach Uta Hagen. It introduces her 6 basic questions for an actor. Now, I want to go through these one by one because as I was reading this, I realized this isn't just about acting in a play. This is a literal survival guide for professional life.
They absolutely are. Uta Hagen's 6 questions are designed to strip away the artificiality of a performance and ground the actor in undeniable reality. So, question number 1.
Yeah.
Who am I?
Okay, let's apply this directly to you, the listener. Imagine you were about to walk into a crucial salary negotiation with your boss. If you walk into that room without deeply answering who am I in this specific context, you are already losing. Are you the undervalued employee begging for scraps? Or are you the highly competent professional bringing undeniable market value to the table? Your internal answer to that question dictates everything about your posture and your tone. What's the second question?
Question 2. What are the circumstances? Meaning, what time is it? Where are we? What happened just before this moment? And what is the physical environment?
Again, back to our salary negotiation. Is the company having a record-breaking quarter, or are they facing layoffs? Did your boss just get out of a stressful board meeting? If you don't map the given circumstances, your performance is going to be completely tone-deaf to reality.
Exactly. Question 3. What are my relationships? How do I relate to the other people in this space?
Right.
Question 4. What do I want? This is often called the objective. What is the singular driving goal I'm trying to achieve in this interaction?
And you have to be honest with yourself here. Like, do you want more money or do you actually just want validation and respect? Because the way you ask for those 2 things looks entirely different.
Which leads directly to question 5. What is my obstacle? What is standing in the way of me getting what I want? Is it the budget? Is it my boss's ego? Is it my own lack of confidence?
And finally, question 6.
What do I do to get what I want? What are the specific, actionable tactics I will employ to overcome the obstacle and achieve the objective?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text explicitly says that when the role players in life, meaning you and me, ask these 6 questions, we're being profoundly challenged to reveal who we truly are and what actually motivates us. It forces you to stop sleepwalking through your interactions.
The poetry also outlines 5 fundamental keys to executing this kind of intentional behavior: substitution, transference, specificity, authenticity, and preparation.
I want to pause on transference for a second because we hear the word substitution a lot, swapping a memory in. But what exactly is this transference in this context? How does the text differentiate that?
That's a vital distinction. Substitution, which the text explores heavily later, is usually about taking a sensory memory from your past and mapping it onto a present action. Transference is specifically about relationships.
Okay.
It's taking the real complex feelings you have for someone in your actual life, maybe a deeply critical parent or a fiercely loyal friend, and psychologically transferring those exact feelings onto your scene partner or your boss or your client.
Wow.
You aren't pretending to respect the person in front of you. You are transferring your genuine respect for someone else onto them.
That is wild. You are basically hacking your own brain's relational network to produce a genuine reaction to a person who hasn't actually earned it. And to do any of this smoothly requires the final key you mentioned, preparation.
Yes. The text makes a fascinating point about preparation. It notes that for an actor, a mere 2-minute line of dialogue routinely requires an hour of intensive rehearsal.
And the author draws a direct cutting analogy to modern leadership here. He points out that historically great orators understood this compression of time. They knew that to speak for 2 minutes authentically requires a massive iceberg of unseen preparation underneath it. But many modern leaders, he argues, have completely forgotten this.
They rely entirely on teleprompters. They read words written by someone else without ever doing the work to understand the fundamental human motivations, the Hagen questions behind those words.
Right.
And the text notes the consequence of this. The moment the teleprompter fails, the moment the artificial script goes away, they completely collapse. They fail because they haven't rehearsed the authentic truth of what they're saying. They don't know why they are saying it.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me, and I want to push back a little bit on this whole framework.
Yeah.
When you describe these 6 questions and the keys like transference, it sounds incredibly methodical, but it also begs a huge question. Are we all just acting in our professional lives? Like, is a lawyer pleading a deeply serious civil rights case or an employee navigating office politics essentially doing the exact same thing as an actor trying to win a Tony Award? Is there a fundamental difference between stage technique and daily survival?
It's a profound question, and the text's underlying thesis suggests that yes, we are all constantly engaged in a form of performance. The fundamental difference isn't the mechanics. The difference is the level of awareness. The trained actor knows they are consciously constructing an identity and utilizing transference for a specific temporary purpose. In our daily lives, we often act without realizing we are playing a role. We let the circumstances dictate our performance passively rather than intentionally choosing our actions based on a clear understanding of what we want and the obstacles we face.
So, if the goal is to stop being passive, to be intentional about this daily acting, how do we actually execute it? Because you can't just sit in a chair and think your way through these 6 questions. Nobody can see your thoughts, which means we have to look at the physical body. Because there is no acting on stage or in life without movement.
Precisely. You have to physicalize the intention. To explain how this works, the text explores the teachings of Michael Chekhov, a legendary Russian-American actor and director. Chekhov believed in the absolute psychophysical connection.
Right.
He taught that physical gestures directly reflect and can even create the inner emotional life. You cannot separate the mind from the body. The actor relies on what Chekhov called the 4 brothers of feeling: ease, form, beauty, and the whole.
I love how the poetry visualizes this concept. It introduces what it calls an ecology of movement. It asks the actor or the reader to imagine moving their physical body through different elemental states. Let's walk through these because it's brilliant. First, imagine exploring space as if the air around you were made of wet clay.
If the space around you is wet clay, every single movement forces you to slow down. You feel heavy, forceful, deliberate. It requires effort to push through. That physical sensation immediately creates an internal feeling of gravity and seriousness.
Contrast that with moving through water. Imagine the air is water. Suddenly your movements are gliding, flowing, joyful. There's a slight resistance, but it's smooth and without the heavy restriction of clay. Or imagine the element of flying movements that are incredibly quick, chaotic, darting in any direction without warning.
And finally, the element of radiating fire. This is about becoming a beacon in the night. It's movement that is attractive, deeply empathetic, making contact with the environment with absolute purpose and ease. It draws the eye naturally.
The text even bridges these theatrical concepts with ancient philosophy, connecting them to the Ayurvedic doshas.
Right. For those unfamiliar, Ayurveda is a traditional system of medicine from India, and the doshas are the 3 fundamental energies believed to govern our physiological and psychological states.
Right.
The text maps the ecology of movement to these doshas. Vata, which represents air and space, connects to the flying, chaotic movements. Pitta, representing fire and transformation, connects to radiating. And Kapha, representing earth and water, connects to the slow molding of clay.
It's essentially teaching barefoot actors to use the empty space of the stage to declare that every single movement, and just as importantly, every moment of stillness, has a profound purpose. You are manipulating energy.
Exactly.
And the specific exercises detailed in the poems perfectly illustrate how hard this is to master. Let's look at the poem about the adult robot.
This is a fantastic example. The setup is an acting class. The student has been given the prompt to play an adult robot, a supercomputer in human form who is afraid of a thunderstorm. So the student begins the scene. He powers up noiselessly. He makes sure his joints don't swivel naturally, and he walks around speaking with a pre-programmed mechanical accent.
But the text notes that the student completely fails the scene. Why? Because he got stuck on the literal intellectual idea of being a robot. He is just stiff, he's rigid, he isn't conveying fear, he's just conveying tension.
Exactly. He is thinking, not feeling. The coach has to stop the scene entirely. The coach tells him, stop being stiff. He instructs the student to apply the ecology of movement: flow, fly, mold, and radiate.
And the moment the student stops thinking about being a robot and instead internalizes those elemental movements, the barefoot android actually comes to life. He collapses to the floor, terrified of the thunder, his hands clamped over his ears, waiting desperately for his master to save him.
Yeah.
He didn't think his way into fear. The physical movement of collapsing and molding to the floor created the emotion of fear.
Another incredibly vivid example from the text is the crawling animal exercise. The setting is simple acting students dressed in basic black tights. The assignment is rudimentary, crawl around the stage embodying an animal. Crucially, no sounds are allowed. You have to communicate entirely through movement.
One student decides he wants to be a lion, but he realizes that just crawling around on all fours like a house cat isn't going to convey the majesty and terror of a lion. So he reaches into his memory. He remembers a time he was at the zoo, and he saw a massive, menacing black bear suddenly stand up on its hind legs.
So, to convey the prowess of the lion, the student makes a bold physical choice. In the middle of this crawling exercise, he slowly stands up, completely silent, mimicking the terrifying looming presence of that black bear he remembered.
Wow.
And the text notes that his coach applauds him. Why? Because the body is speaking paragraphs before a single line of dialogue is ever uttered. The posture, the gaze, how he managed the clutter of the space around him, these things dictated the power dynamics of the room instantly.
Listener, I want you to think about this in your modern reality.
Yeah.
You don't have to be in black tights on a stage. Picture your next crucial Zoom meeting. You are confined to a tiny, two-dimensional digital box. But even in that little box, your movement ecology is broadcasting everything about you. How you sit, where your gaze is fixed, how often you fidget, or how completely still you can hold yourself. It broadcasts your power, your intention, and your confidence long before you ever unmute your microphone.
It is the absolute physical manifestation of those 6 Uta Hagen questions.
Yeah.
You are showing everyone in that digital room exactly who you are and what you want entirely through your physical form.
But this raises a really important question, and the text asks it directly. If the body is just the instrument, the trumpet, so to speak, what is the sheet music? Like, what actually fuels the genuine, messy emotion behind that calculated movement?
That brings us to what is arguably the most fascinating and, frankly, the most psychologically terrifying part of this deep dive. We have to talk about the secret weapon of substitution.
Right.
This is the exact mechanism that connects the completely artificial environment of the stage to deeply personal, incredibly intimate memory.
We touched on this briefly, but we need to go deep here. Because substitution is how an actor achieves true emotional recall. The text refers to it as a psychological sleight of hand.
Yes. It is a technique designed to bypass the brain's logical defenses. You take a real-life sensation or memory, something that genuinely makes your heart race or makes you feel completely at peace, and you aggressively map it onto the fictional event happening in the scene. The goal is to trick your nervous system into reacting to the memory while your body is performing the script.
And the examples the author provides in these poems are so specific and visceral, they really stick with you. Let's walk through them, starting at the poem about the restaurant panic.
In this scene, the actor has a very specific objective. He has to play a character who is having a severe panic attack because a group of waiters has suddenly surrounded his table to sing a loud, obnoxious birthday song.
Now, obviously, the actor himself is not naturally terrified of waiters singing happy birthday, so if he just pretends to be scared, it's going to look like bad community theater. He'll just be pantomiming fear. So to get that genuine physiological reaction, the tight chest, the inability to catch a breath, the sheer panic, he uses substitution.
He digs into his past and substitutes the deeply traumatic memory of being severely bullied on the schoolyard as a child. He maps the faces of his childhood tormentors onto the faces of the actors playing the waiters. And he executes this memory swap with such intensity that his nervous system actually believes he is back on that playground. He realistically hyperventilates and nearly collapses on stage.
His body couldn't tell the difference between the memory and reality. The text notes it was so intense that it's only when a fellow actor, someone who happened to have yoga training, steps out of character and quietly starts coaching his breathing, that he is finally able to come back to reality. He used a real past trauma to fuel a present artificial illusion.
The text gives us another jarring example with the poem about the cymbals and drum. The setup is simple. An actor is asleep in a bed on stage. 3 other actors sneak out and smash deafening cymbals and a bass drum right next to his head. He is supposed to wake up startled.
But the actor knows that a normal startle response isn't enough for the scene. The director wants sheer, absolute, paralyzing terror. So what does he substitute? He substitutes the memory of his father violently banging on his bedroom door at 6 a.m. because of a bad report card.
When the cymbals crash, he opens the imaginary bedroom door on stage, and he just stares at the musicians. The poem describes his expression perfectly. It says, he had a look that would scare the spirit of a dead man.
Oh my God.
Right. The class erupts in applause because it was brilliant acting. But to achieve that brilliance, he had to willingly reach back into a very dark, very painful place in his own childhood.
But I want to be clear, it's not always about mining trauma, right? Sometimes the obstacle in a scene is your own actual anxiety, and substitution is used to find comfort.
That's a great point, and the text explores that beautifully in the poem about the introvert on the beach. This particular actor is incredibly shy. The author calls him an extroverted introvert. The script requires him to be completely shirtless in a pair of swim trunks, casually interacting with beach props on stage.
And because he is so self-conscious, his body is betraying him. He is physically shivering on stage. Not because the theater is cold, but from pure nervous terror of being exposed and perceived.
The acting coach sees this physical block and stops the scene. The coach asks him a brilliant question: what in your home environment quiets you down? The student thinks about it, and he visualizes his small brown terrier with pointed ears.
The coach tells him to take that feeling, to mentally map that terrier right there onto the sand of the stage beach with him, and the effect is instantaneous. The moment he pictures his dog's loving, non-judgmental eyes, the shivering stops. The nerves vanish. He finds absolute peace and grounding through the substituted image of his pet.
We see this tactile use of memory again in the poem about the bathtub. The student is sitting in a dry white porcelain tub on stage. The exercise is to simply pantomime taking a shower. He tries it initially, and it's totally flat. He's just rubbing his arms in the air. It looks fake.
So he uses substitution. He substitutes the specific physical memory of washing his dog. He remembers how the dog fights the water, how the dog violently shakes the water off while he's desperately trying to rinse the soap out of its fur. By substituting that specific physical struggle, suddenly the actor's pantomime becomes chaotic, authentic, and vibrant. His muscles engage differently. He brings a completely dry tub to life.
But perhaps the absolute masterpiece of specificity in this collection is the poem about the t-shirt store exercise. The premise of the exercise is almost insultingly mundane. The actor has to walk up to a Salvation Army clothing rack to replace a shirt that a friend vomited on.
And I love how much time the text spends describing this ruined shirt. It's described in agonizing, hilarious detail. It's a light purple, it has red and orange arms, there's a giant painted green flower on it, a toad sitting on the sleeves, and a massive white number 7.
It is just a fantastically ugly piece of clothing.
Truly. And his objective is very simple. He wants to replace it with something plain, a solid color. The physical action required for the exercise is literally just picking a shirt off a rack. That's it. Yeah. But the actor turns this incredibly basic action into a spellbinding 2-minute performance. He approaches the rack, he slowly, methodically handles each and every hanger. He inspects the fabric, he calculates, and the entire acting class is dead silent, holding their breath watching him shop.
Wow.
Why? Because he substituted the incredibly careful, intense muscle memory of shopping at discount stores with his mother when he was young.
What's fascinating here is the sheer psychological brilliance of what is happening in the actor's brain.
Right.
He isn't pretending to care about the shirts. He is taking a verified neurological, emotional truth, the deep feeling of scarcity and care when shopping with his mother, the terror of an angry father at the door, the unconditional comfort of a pet, and he's pouring that highly potent real emotion into a completely fictional vessel.
It's powerful stuff. Okay, but I have to stop here because this is where I really struggle with this entire method. I want to push back on this.
All right, let's hear it.
If you are constantly mining your own childhood, your own intimate personal relationships, your own traumas, just to perform a task, whether you're an actor trying to nail a scene or you're a salesperson trying to manufacture empathy to close a deal, doesn't that completely exhaust the soul? How do you possibly separate your real lived memory from the artificial moment once the scene is over or the meeting ends?
That is exactly the razor's edge this poetry collection is exploring. You've hit on the central danger of the craft. And it leads us directly into the dark side of these techniques. The text asks, what happens when the line between the substituted emotion and reality vanishes entirely? What happens when your brain can no longer unblur the lines between the role and the self?
Right, the danger of illusion. The text illustrates this vividly in a poem called The Ghost Scene. The setup is eerie but simple. An actor is in his pajamas, getting ready for bed in a newly rented apartment. Suddenly, a female ghost appears in his room, the spirit of a woman who previously jumped off the balcony.
And how does the actor react? He doesn't scream. He calmly looks at her, checks his watch, and politely tells her she needs to leave because he's the only one legally on the lease.
So practical.
Right, so she leaves. Then a male ghost appears, the spirit of a man who was stabbed in that very apartment. Same reaction. The actor calmly dismisses him, citing the lease agreement.
The actor then gets into bed, pulls up a quilt that his mother made him, and goes to sleep. The scene ends, and the audience erupts in applause. It's a fantastic, comedic, perfectly executed vanquishing of fear through absurdity.
But the poem doesn't end with the applause. It ends on a deeply chilling psychological note. The text explicitly states that the actor does not realize the psychological residue this simple exercise will leave in his mind for the rest of his acting career.
Because the brain doesn't always know it's a game. He willingly invited the concept of ghosts, of suicide, of murder into his psyche in order to play the scene truthfully. And the warning here is that you can't always just tell those concepts to leave your brain when the curtain falls. The emotional toll bleeds into real life.
We see an even more concrete example of this psychological bleeding in the hot chocolate test. This is a fascinating narrative. Two young actors are assigned to play brothers whose mother has recently died. According to their character backstories, their mother used to make them hot chocolate in a very specific way, exactly 3 marshmallows topped with fine chocolate cuttings. In the scene, the older brother comforts the crying younger brother by reminiscing about this.
It's a poignant acting exercise.
Right.
But then the poem flashes forward several years. That younger brother is no longer an actor. He is now a wealthy, powerful executive in the corporate world. He's conducting interviews for an executive assistant. And what is his entire hiring test? He asks the candidates to make him a cup of hot chocolate.
He literally bases his hiring decision on this. He ultimately hires a woman solely because she accidentally recreates his fictional mother's exact drink, the precise 3 marshmallows, the exact chocolate cuttings. The sight of it causes this powerful corporate executive to break down and weep right there in his office.
Do you see how crazy that is? The trauma and the character background from a stage play a decade ago literally rewired his brain. The fiction became his actual reality in the corporate world. His judgment in real life was completely compromised by a substituted memory from an acting class.
But the most devastating example of this blurring where the craft is weaponized is the poem about the deception on the beach.
This one is genuinely disturbing because this is where the craft of acting is used for pure calculative manipulation entirely offstage. The poem describes a former classmate of the narrator, a man who is now a highly trained actor. He wants to shoot a film in a specific beach town, and he targets a woman who lives there to get access and sympathy.
To do this, he stages elaborate accidents. He uses his mastery of movement ecology in given circumstances. He pretends to be helplessly lost. He pretends to be physically hurt.
And she completely believes him. I mean, why wouldn't she? She opens her heart and her home to him because his performance is flawless. He is radiating vulnerability. And this is the terrifying truth about these techniques. When acting is executed perfectly, utilizing deep substitution and physical truth, the observer cannot physically tell it's a lie. The brain processes it as reality.
She only discovers the horrific truth by accident. She stumbles upon his tent on the beach and overhears him casually relating the success of his scenes to his director. He is bragging about how well he played her.
The poem states she learns the absolute hardest lesson in life, that uncorroborated love built on an actor's half-truth and perfectly calibrated emotions leads only to complete heartbreak. This man, an actor true to his craft, could turn his deep emotions on and off like a faucet. He created a completely fabricated reality that fundamentally destroyed the person who believed in the illusion.
This raises a massive, flashing red light about critical thinking in our daily lives. We live in a world surrounded by highly persuasive individuals who understand these mechanics. They might have learned them formally in an acting studio, or they might have learned them intuitively by surviving corporate boardrooms or political campaigns.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? I want you to seriously think about this right now.
Yeah.
How do you know when you are being acted to? If a salesperson is using perfect movement ecology to project confidence while pitching you a product, or if someone on a first date is using substitution to manufacture deep empathy, or if a politician is using transference to secure your vote, how do we test the authenticity of those around us when the performance is technically flawless?
It's incredibly difficult. And to navigate this dangerous boundary between truth and illusion, between being guided and being manipulated, we need a framework. We need to understand the people who teach these transformations.
Which brings us to the final, crucial section of our deep dive. The text calls them the crucibles of transformation. We have to look at the coaches, the directors, the guides who wield this incredible psychological power over their students. Because if a student's mind can become this heavily compromised by their own substituted trauma, who is responsible for pulling them back to reality? How does a teacher safely guide that?
The text presents three distinct pedagogical archetypes. The first is the classic old-school disciplinarian. The poem describes a shouting coach who adheres strictly to the Stella Adler approach.
Now, for context, Stella Adler was a legendary acting teacher who famously broke away from the intense, inward-looking emotional recall methods of Lee Strasberg. Adler believed that constantly mining your own personal trauma was unhealthy and limiting. She believed in the power of imagination and sociological research.
Exactly. And the coach in the poem embodies this fiercely. He yells at his students, "Use your imagination, boy. Hold your head up or you're an actor." He demands rigorous, intense intellectual analysis.
If you're playing a prince, this coach says you don't just sit around trying to feel like a prince by remembering a time you felt important. You have to go to the library. You have to know the entire historical background, the politics, the lineage of your character. This coach teaches that clear, physical action is vastly more important than messy internal feelings. He demands grandeur. He demands presence. You have to strut on the stage. You have to be bigger than life.
And what's truly interesting is the student's reaction to this method. The student absolutely hates the shouting. He feels humiliated, like he's back in grade school being belittled by a tyrant.
Yeah.
But in the end, he has to admit that it worked. The rigid, unapologetic structure, the intense demand for historical precision, it actually gave him the psychological armor and the confidence to embody a massive, tragic hero on stage. It made him a significantly better actor, even if it left some emotional bruises.
But then the text pivots to a totally different approach, the yoga intervention. We touched on this earlier with the breathing exercise, but let's look at the coach's philosophy here. The student is struggling to improvise. He's wearing the mandatory black tights, and the coach throws out prompts, be a giraffe, be an ice cream truck, and the student is just completely frozen.
He's stuck in his head. He's trying to intellectually map out how a human body looks like an ice cream truck, and it looks terrible. It's forced and unnatural.
So instead of shouting at him to use his imagination, this coach recognizes a nervous system in panic. The coach orders him to leave the studio and take a yoga class. And through the practice of yoga, the student learns a totally different way to access his instrument. He learns to stop over-intellectualizing and start breathing. He learns to slow down his heart rate, to welcome the physical flow of a gesture rather than forcing it.
And it is precisely that physical flow, that release of tension, that naturally unlocks his memories without trauma. He suddenly remembers the awe and wonder of his mother taking him to the zoo, watching a giraffe stretch its long neck to eat leaves. He remembers the pure, visceral childhood joy of hearing the ice cream truck bell ringing in his neighborhood on a hot summer day. By connecting his breath to his body, the improvisation flows out of him organically.
Wow.
Yeah, empathy and breath succeeded exactly where rigid analysis had completely failed.
Which brings us to the third archetype, what the text calls the teacher as prince. This feels like the symbiosis of the two extremes. This is the modern prince of the intellect.
This teacher doesn't shout, but he doesn't like structure either. He wields a laptop instead of a booming voice. He's fiercely intelligent, translating multiple languages effortlessly right in front of the class. He drops the names of heavy philosophers into casual conversation like raindrops.
But crucially, he uses this massive, intimidating intellect alongside incredibly disarming charm. He doesn't force his students to mimic him or cower before him. Instead, he uses his knowledge to encourage them to deconstruct complex concepts, to fearlessly challenge established ideas, and most importantly, to build their own philosophies. He takes the completely unintelligible and makes it understandable.
If we look at the evolution of pedagogy presented in these poems, we see a clear argument. The pressure and rigid analysis of the shouting coach create the necessary architectural structure of a performance.
Right.
But it is the empathy, the breath, and the intellectual partnership represented by the yoga teacher and the prince of the intellect that actually sustain the artist's spirit over a lifetime.
And here is the beautiful, resonant, full circle moment of this entire deep dive. If you go back to the biographical section at the very beginning of the text, Manuel de Valle Colón, the brilliant poet writing about these acting coaches, the man who lived in the Carver houses of East Harlem, who forced his way into Princeton and Yale, who sat as a chief judge, he was that teacher as Prince in his real life.
Exactly. When you read the opening tributes to him, you see it perfectly. When Dr. Ibarrondo describes the man who taught him to articulate his own knowledge, or when Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor calls him her first role model who fought for change, they are explicitly describing the teacher as Prince. He was a mentor who used his vast, hard-won knowledge not to intimidate, but to empower others to find their own authentic voice on whatever stage they stood on.
It is an absolutely incredible journey to track. We started in the concrete housing projects of East Harlem. We traveled through the elite halls of the Ivy League and the high-stakes courtrooms of the law, and we ended up barefoot in a black box acting studio, meticulously dissecting the raw, fundamental mechanics of human emotion. We've seen how movement ecology dictates the power dynamics of every room you enter. We've seen how substituted memories fuel our deepest tears and our greatest triumphs. And we've seen how the line between who we actually are and who we pretend to be is frighteningly, dangerously thin.
And all of this leaves us with a profound, almost unsettling reflection to mull over. If our everyday professional and personal lives rely so heavily on these exact theatrical techniques, if we are constantly adapting our posture to control a Zoom meeting, if we are pulling from our past to manufacture empathy with a client, and if we are constantly altering our behavior to fit the given circumstances of our social circles, when are we ever truly not acting?
Is there a raw, completely unperformed version of yourself underneath all of these techniques? Or are we all just beautifully complex, constantly evolving accumulations of the roles we've learned to play to survive, to connect, and to thrive in this world?
It's a question that challenges the very nature of authenticity itself.
It really does. Because maybe the courtroom and the theater aren't opposites after all. Maybe the binary idea that we can easily separate truth from fiction is just a comforting illusion, because at the end of the day, the human heart is both the judge demanding the facts and the playwright inventing the story. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We invite you to step out into your day and pay very close attention to the invisible scripts running in the world around you. Watch the movement ecology in your next meeting. Notice the substitution in a friend's story. Pay attention to how you answer those 6 questions. The stage is everywhere. Take care, and we'll see you next time.